Hello viewers, you're most welcome to the eMath learning platform by Peter Ikaja. I am going to take you through solving quadratic equations. And remember, our YouTube channel still remains eMath learning platform, and below is my contact information for any kind of questions or clarifications. Let's look at solving quadratic equations. We are mainly going to look at four methods that we can use to solve a quadratic equation. And the methods will include the following. Number one, factorization method. Number two, use of the quadratic formula. Number three, completing squares. And number four, the graphical method. So now let's look at the first method. The first method is going to be factorization method. An example for this. Solve the following quadratic equations. So we shall have part A. Our part A is going to be x squared minus x minus 6 equals to 0. What would you do if you asked to solve such a quadratic equation? Here are the basics, please. The first basics are learn how to find the product, the sum, and the factors. How do we find the product? The product is found by multiplying the coefficient of x squared by the constant term together with its sign. So when you multiply 1 times negative 6, you get negative 6. And the sum is obtained by simply considering the coefficient of x. So here I see a silent 1, but you take it with its sign, and that gives you negative 1. The factors. The factors are obtained by looking or thinking about two numbers that can be multiplied together to give you negative 6. But when you add the same numbers, you get negative 1. I come again. Think of any two numbers that can be multiplied together to give negative 6. But if added together, you get negative 1. So should you try out negative 3 and 2, you realize negative 3 by 2 gives you negative 6, but negative 3 plus 2 gives you negative 1. So these two conditions have to be satisfied for you to consider these two numbers as your factors. Next step. The next step is simple because it is a matter of getting the factors that you obtained, multiply each of them by x. After multiplying each of them by x, then they will replace our negative x as this whole term. So once they replace negative x, it means we shall have negative 3x because of this which was multiplied by x, and plus positive 2x because of this 2 that we multiplied by x. Negative 6 remains the way it was originally, and on the right we shall maintain our 0. Next step is now calling for factorization techniques. What do you look at? If you look at this pair of terms, the common factor is simply x. So we pull out x, and here we remain with x, here we remain with negative 3. And that is how I got this term. Then in this pair of terms, the common factor can simply be seen as positive 2. And if you pull it out of the bracket, we shall remain with x minus 3 equals to 0. Now, we realize that there is a common bracket, which can also be factorized out. But when you do so, you will remain with x plus 2 also in another bracket. And that is how this step comes in. Next to this, you're either going to equate the first bracket to 0 and also or equate x minus 3 to 0. So we shall say either x plus 2 equals to 0 or x minus 3 equals to 0. That is our next step. Then finally, you simply get the values of x, or you solve this and also solve this. If I'm to solve this, then positive 2 can be moved to the right hand side and its sign will change to a negative. And if I'm to solve this, the negative 3 will move to the right hand side to become a positive 3. And that is how we simply get our solution as either negative 2 or positive 3. Let's look at part B. Part B, it is still going to be the same concept. Look at the coefficient of x squared, which is 1. Multiply it by 12. This time it is a positive, so you take it as a positive. 1 times 12 gives you positive 12. And look at the coefficient of x. It is, in this case, negative 7. That becomes your sum. Then finally, think of any two numbers that can be multiplied together to give you 12. But if added together, you get negative 7. Indeed, if you try out negative 3 and negative 4, you will realize they actually satisfy both conditions. Next step, multiply these factors by x, each of them by x. So this by x will be negative 3x, and this by x will be negative 4x. So those two terms added together will replace the negative 7x in the next step. As you can see, so we have negative 4x minus 3x. But remember, it still takes you back to the same quadratic equation we had, because if I combine negative 4x and negative 3x, I surely get negative 7x. So we have not made any change. Next to that is factorization again. In this pair, x is a common factor. Pull it out. And in this term here, 3 is a common factor. But when we pull it out with a negative, then automatically this sign changes to a negative, such that in case you open this bracket again, you surely get back negative 3x plus 12. So that is what has happened here. So we again realize that there is a common bracket, which is x minus 4. But if we have a common bracket out, we shall also remain with x minus 3 in its own bracket. So let's look at the next step. The next step is what we have just talked about in the previous step. We now have x minus 3 into x minus 4 equals to 0. And from here, we either let this to be 0 or this equals to 0. Then finally solve for x like we said. This gives positive 3 as the value of x, and this gives positive 4 as the value of x. And that becomes our solution. Come to part C. Part C is quite interesting because now we have a quadratic in terms of y, and even the coefficient of y squared is more than 1. In this case, we have 4. What do you do? The concept remains the same, dear viewers. So the product will still be 4 multiplied by negative 2 to give you negative 8. The sum will just simply be the coefficient of y, which is 7. Look for two numbers that can be multiplied together to give you negative 8, but if you add them, you get positive 7. So the two numbers are basically going to be 8 and negative 1. Next step, multiply these factors by y. Since this time round we have y, I multiply this also by y. So I will get 8y minus y, which replace our 7y. But still the difference of the two gives back the same 7y that we have replaced. Then you maintain the negative 2 and the 0 on the right hand side. Next step is factorization. In this pair of terms, the common factor is 4y. So we remain with y plus 2. Between this and this, I see a common factor as negative 1, though silent. So pull out negative 1, you remain with y plus 2. There is again a common bracket. So because of the common bracket, when you factorize it out, you remain with 4y minus 1 equals to 0. Next to that will be that term. We now have 4y minus 1 into y plus 2 equals to 0. Either the first bracket equals to 0 or the second one is equals to 0. And that gives you the values of y as a quarter and negative 2. That becomes our solution. When you look at the next part, that is our part D, it is simply the same concept as part C. So I would require you, our viewer, or our student for today to try out this and see whether you come to the same steps and to the same solution as I have come up with here. So try out this, you will get all these steps clearly, and from that point you will get your values of P as 4 and P as negative 3 out of 2. Remember, the concepts are still the same, the steps are still the same, and all the ideas are still the same, and even the number of steps is still the same. From this point, I now believe that you can try out an exercise which is just given below in the next page. So this is going to be your trial exercise. Make sure you try it out, do enough practice, because what makes you a mathematician is simply practice. Thank you so much. May God bless you mathematically. And please remember to subscribe to our channel, eMath Learning Platform, to always keep receiving updates whenever I upload new content. Have the best of your day. Bye.